The sky over the Pacific Northwest was a mess on Thanksgiving Eve, 1971. It was cold, dark, and raining hard. A man in a business suit sat in the back of Northwest Orient Airlines Flight 305, a Boeing 727 headed from Portland to Seattle. He ordered a bourbon and soda. He lit a cigarette. He looked like any other businessman on a short flight. His ticket said Dan Cooper. He wasn't any other businessman. Sometime after takeoff, he passed a note to a flight attendant. She, thinking he was just another lonely guy giving her his number, slipped it into her purse. He leaned closer. Miss, you better look at that note. I have a bomb. And just like that, the legend of D.B. Cooper was born. The note was polite but firm. He wanted $200,000 in unmarked $20 bills. He wanted 4 parachutes. He wanted the plane to be refueled when they landed in Seattle. He was calm, he was specific, he knew exactly what he was doing. The airline and the FBI scrambled. They got the money, they got the parachutes. The plane landed in Seattle, the passengers were released, and Cooper's demands were met. The plane took off again, now with just Cooper, the pilots, and a flight attendant. He directed them to fly toward Mexico City, low and slow, with the landing gear down. And somewhere between Seattle and Reno, over the dense black forests of southwestern Washington, Cooper did the unthinkable. He lowered the aft stairs of the 727, and with the money strapped to his body, he jumped into the freezing night. He was never seen again. The FBI launched one of the longest and most expensive investigations in its history. They called it NORJAC for Northwest Hijacking. They interviewed hundreds of people. They chased thousands of leads. They found almost nothing. A small portion of the ransom money, about $5,800, was found by a young boy on the banks of the Columbia River in 1980, but it only deepened the mystery. The rest of the money and the man himself simply vanished. The question has haunted people for over 50 years. Who was D.B. Cooper? Was he an experienced paratrooper? A disgruntled veteran? A clever amateur who got lucky? Did he survive the jump? Or did he end up a skeleton in the woods, his treasure scattered by the wind? But what if the answer is simpler? What if the FBI actually caught their man just 5 months later for a nearly identical crime and simply failed to connect the dots? What if they had the best suspect all along and let him slip through their fingers, not on the plane, but in their own files? This is the case for Richard Floyd McCoy Jr., and it's a compelling one. 5 months after D.B. Cooper became a folk hero, another hijacking rocked the skies. On April 7th, 1972, United Airlines Flight 855 was on its way from Denver to Los Angeles. A man on board handed a flight attendant a note. He said he had a hand grenade and a bomb in his briefcase. He wanted $500,000. He wanted 4 parachutes. He wanted the plane to land, refuel, and take off again. It was almost a carbon copy. The hijacker was calm and polite, just like Cooper. He had the plane land in San Francisco, where the passengers were let off and his demands were met. Then he ordered the pilots to fly out over the Pacific and then back toward Utah. Just like Cooper, he ordered the pilots to fly with the landing gear down and the flaps at 15 degrees. And just like Cooper, he went to the back of the plane, lowered the aft stairs, and jumped into the night, this time over the Utah wilderness. The method was so similar it felt like a rerun. The FBI, still reeling from the Cooper case, had to wonder if it was the same man. This time, however, the hijacker made mistakes. He left behind the note he'd written. He also left a magazine he had been reading. He had even talked to a flight attendant about his hometown. The FBI had clues. 2 days later, they had their man. His name was Richard McCoy. On the surface, McCoy was the last person you'd suspect. He was 29 years old. He was a husband and a father of 2 young children. He taught Mormon Sunday school. He was studying law enforcement at Brigham Young University. He was a Vietnam veteran, a former Green Beret, and a decorated helicopter pilot. He was also an avid skydiver, a demolition expert, a survivalist. He was, in short, a man who possessed the exact set of skills needed to pull off a hijacking and survive a high-altitude jump. The FBI, acting on a tip from a highway patrolman who knew McCoy, put him under surveillance. The pieces fell into place quickly. McCoy's handwriting matched the hijacker's note. His fingerprints were on the magazine left on the plane. When they searched his house, they found a jumpsuit and a bag full of cash. Over $499,000, they had him. Richard McCoy was convicted of the hijacking and sentenced to 45 years in prison. Case closed. But for 2 of the FBI agents who worked the McCoy case, Russell Kalim and Bernie Rhodes, it wasn't closed at all. The more they looked at their man, the more they saw the ghost of D.B. Cooper. They became convinced they hadn't just caught the United hijacker. They believed they had caught the Northwest Orient hijacker too. They spent years arguing their case, both inside the Bureau and after they retired. They even co-authored a book called D.B. Cooper, The Real McCoy, laying out all the evidence. Their argument is so strong that for many, it's the only theory that makes any sense. So why did the FBI officially dismiss him? Why did they insist for decades that McCoy was not Cooper, even when their own agents were screaming that he was? Did they ignore the best suspect they ever had? To answer that, you have to lay the two cases side by side. The similarities are stunning. Let's start with the method. The modus operandi. Both hijackers used a note to inform the crew of the situation. Both claimed to have a bomb. Both were strangely polite and calm throughout the ordeal. Both demanded a large sum of money and multiple parachutes. 4. To be exact. Why 4? The theory is that it forced the authorities to assume the hijacker might take a hostage. This would ensure they didn't sabotage the parachutes. It was a clever, calculated detail, and both men used it. Both hijackers knew the specifics of the Boeing 727. They knew about the aft stairs, a unique feature that could be lowered in flight. This was not common knowledge. Both men understood the aeronautics involved in keeping the plane low and slow enough for a jump. They specified the same flap setting, 15 degrees, to maintain a slow speed without stalling. These are not the actions of an amateur. These are the actions of someone with knowledge. Richard McCoy had that knowledge. He was a pilot. He was an expert skydiver. And D.B. Cooper, whoever he was, clearly had the same knowledge. It seems like a huge coincidence for two different men to come up with the exact same, highly specific and very risky plan within 5 months of each other. Then there's the physical evidence, or lack thereof. In the Cooper case, the FBI was left with very little. They found a black clip-on tie on the seat where Cooper had been sitting. On the tie, they found trace amounts of DNA, but 1971 technology was primitive. It was a dead end for decades. They also found a few cigarette butts, but that was about it. Here's where McCoy comes back in. McCoy's family claimed he owned a tie with a clip identical to the one left on the plane. His wife, Karen, later said she remembered him losing it. After McCoy's arrest, his family members told the press they believed he was Cooper. His own co-pilot from the National Guard said McCoy once talked about how to hijack a plane, outlining a plan that was eerily similar to what Cooper did. Let's talk about the disguises. Cooper wore what witnesses described as a dark suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He also wore dark, wraparound sunglasses. Some witnesses said he might have been wearing a wig and makeup that he looked put on. When McCoy committed his hijacking 5 months later, what did he use as a disguise? A wig, fake teeth, makeup to make him look older. He was carrying an attaché case that he claimed held a bomb, but it actually contained a paperweight shaped like a hand grenade and some dummy sticks of dynamite. He was playing a part. It's entirely possible that on Thanksgiving Eve, 1971, Richard McCoy was doing a dress rehearsal. He used a more basic disguise, perhaps just the sunglasses and some subtle makeup to see if he could pull it from him. He succeeded. He got away clean. But the money, $200,000, may not have been enough for his needs. He was reportedly in deep financial trouble. So 5 months later, he tried it again, asking for more money, but this time his disguise was less effective, and he was a little sloppier. He left clues, he got caught. This brings us to the arguments against McCoy being Cooper, which are the very reasons the FBI used to officially rule him out. And these arguments need to be taken seriously. First, the physical descriptions don't quite match. Witnesses on the Cooper flight described a man in his mid-40s, between 5'10" and 6'1". Richard McCoy, at the time, was 29 years old and 5'10". The age is the biggest discrepancy. However, eyewitness accounts are notoriously unreliable. People are terrible at guessing ages, especially under stress. And if Cooper was wearing makeup, as witnesses suspected and as McCoy was known to use, he could easily have made himself look older. The FBI composite sketches of Cooper also don't look exactly like McCoy, but then again, they don't look exactly like each other either. Sketches are interpretations, not photographs. To dismiss a suspect based on a vague age description and a drawing seems weak. The second argument the FBI made is more technical. It's about skill. Initially, the FBI believed D.B. Cooper had to be an expert skydiver, a paratrooper. This pointed squarely at men like McCoy, but over time, their theory shifted. Many in the skydiving community looked at the conditions of the jump sector at night, in a storm, with winds over 100 miles per hour, into rugged, forested terrain, wearing a business suit and loafers wind, and concluded that no expert would ever attempt such a thing. It was suicide. They pointed to his parachute choice. Cooper was given 4 parachutes. 2 were primary chutes and 2 were reserve chutes. One of the primary chutes was a C9 canopy, a military-grade parachute. The other was a training rig, a civilian parachute that had been sewn shut and was used only for classroom demonstrations. Cooper didn't notice this. He took the other primary and one of the reserves. The FBI later argued that an expert like McCoy would have immediately recognized the dummy chute and would have demanded a replacement. The fact that Cooper didn't suggests he was an amateur who didn't know what he was looking at. This led to the FBI's new profile. Cooper was not an expert. He was a wannabe, maybe with some military experience, but not a seasoned paratrooper. He was an amateur who got in over his head and most likely died during the jump. From this perspective, Richard McCoy was actually too qualified. He was too good. He would have known better. He would have known the jump was insane. He would have recognized the dummy parachute. Therefore, he couldn't be Cooper. This argument has a certain logic, but it's also full of holes. First, surviving the jump was not impossible. It was just incredibly dangerous. Richard McCoy was a Green Beret. He was trained to operate in extreme conditions. A dangerous jump might not have seemed like suicide to him. It might have seemed like a challenge. He was known for being a bit of a thrill seeker, an adrenaline junkie. Second, the parachute argument. Is it really a smoking gun? Maybe Cooper didn't inspect the parachutes closely because he was in a hurry. Maybe he was focused on other details of his escape. Or maybe he did notice the training rig and simply didn't care, since there was still one other functional primary chute. To base an entire rejection of a prime suspect on the idea that he should have noticed a detail about a parachute seems flimsy. It feels like an agency trying to find reasons to exclude someone rather than include them. The third and perhaps strongest argument against McCoy is his alibi. On the night of the Cooper hijacking, November 24th, 1971, it was the day before Thanksgiving. McCoy claimed he was at home in Utah with his family having Thanksgiving dinner. His wife and family backed up his story completely. They swore he was there. For the FBI, a solid alibi is often enough to clear a suspect. But is it that solid? Family members lie for each other, especially when a loved one is facing a serious crime. The dinner could have happened, but the timing could have been fudged. McCoy was a pilot. He could have flown to Portland, committed the hijacking, jumped, and made his way back home in time for the official family gathering on Thanksgiving Day itself. It would have been difficult and risky, but not impossible for a man of his training and audacity. The alibi is a problem for the McCoy theory, but it's not an insurmountable one. It depends on the word of people who had every reason to protect him. So why would the FBI cling to these reasons? Why would they dismiss a suspect who looks so good on paper? The answer might be a mix of bureaucratic inertia and simple human error. When the Cooper hijacking happened, it was a massive event. It was a slap in the face to law enforcement. The FBI threw everything it had at the case and came up with nothing. It was a huge public failure. 5 months later, the McCoy hijacking happens. They catch the guy in 2 days. It was a huge success. It was a win for the Bureau. Psychologically, it's easier to see these as two separate events. One is an unsolved mystery, a legendary ghost. The other is a solved case, a man behind bars. To admit that the man you caught for Case B was also the guy who got away in Case A is to admit that you almost let him get away twice. It connects your big failure to your big success in an uncomfortable way. It's cleaner bureaucratically to keep them separate. The Norjack file on Cooper was already massive. To merge it with the McCoy case would have been a nightmare. It was simpler to rule him out and move on. The agents who actually caught McCoy, Rhodes, and Kalame didn't have this problem. They were focused on their man. They weren't invested in the sprawling, frustrating Cooper investigation. They looked at McCoy and saw Cooper, but their voices were drowned out by the larger institution. The official narrative had been set. McCoy is not Cooper. And once a large organization like the FBI sets a narrative, it's very hard to change it. There's one more piece of evidence that complicates things for everyone. The money found at Tina Bar on the Columbia River in 1980. Those disintegrating $20 bills were confirmed to be from Cooper's ransom. The location of the find, however, doesn't fit well with a jump from Flight 305 along its known flight path. Geologists and hydrologists have studied the currents of the river and propose that the money had to have been deposited much farther upstream to have washed up at Tina Bar in that condition. This finding throws a wrench in almost every theory. It doesn't align with the official flight path, and it certainly doesn't align with a jump path that would have allowed Richard McCoy to land and make his way back home to Utah easily. The money find suggests Cooper may have jumped much earlier and in a different location than the crew of the plane believed, or it suggests a complex series of events after the landing that we can't even imagine. Proponents of the McCoy theory have to do some gymnastics to explain the Tina Bar money. Perhaps McCoy backtracked and buried some of the money there later. Perhaps it was a portion of the money he lost during the jump and it traveled in an unusual way. It's the single weakest point in the case for McCoy, but it's also a weak point for the FBI's official case, as it doesn't fit their narrative either. The money is a mystery all on its own. So what happened to Richard McCoy? His story doesn't end with a prison sentence. In 1974, 2 years into his 45-year term, he proved he was still a man of considerable skill and daring. Using a fake handgun he had sculpted from dental soap, he and a few other inmates hijacked a prison garbage truck and smashed their way through the gates of the federal penitentiary in Pennsylvania. He was a fugitive. For 3 months, McCoy was on the run. The FBI finally tracked him down to a house in Virginia Beach, and McCoy walked out of the house, fired a pistol at the agents, and the FBI returned fire. A single shot from a shotgun hit him in the chest. Richard McCoy, the decorated veteran, the Sunday school teacher, the convicted hijacker, and the prime D.B. Cooper suspect, was dead at the age of 31. He never confessed to being D.B. Cooper. He denied it to the end. But he also reportedly told a fellow inmate that he was Cooper, but that he couldn't admit it because it would destroy his family's chance of appealing his conviction. We are left with his denial and a mountain of circumstantial evidence that says he was lying. In 2016, the FBI officially closed the active investigation into the D.B. Cooper case. After 45 years, they concluded that their resources were better spent on other priorities. They said they would still look at any specific physical evidence of the parachutes or the money that might emerge, but they were no longer chasing leads. The ghost had won. But did he? Or did the FBI close the file on a mystery they had inadvertently solved decades ago? When you step back and look at the whole picture, the case for Richard McCoy is overwhelming. The coincidences are too numerous, too specific to be easily dismissed. A man with the exact skill set commits a nearly identical crime just 5 months after the original. He uses the same methods, the same knowledge of the aircraft, the same demands. He even uses a similar type of disguise. This isn't just a copycat. A copycat might get the general idea right, but McCoy's crime was a mirror image, down to the technical details like flap setting. The reasons for his official exclusion by the FBI seem thin. An unreliable age estimate from stressed eyewitnesses, or an institutional theory about the hijacker's skill level that is, itself, just a theory. A family alibi that is inherently suspect. Compared to the powerful similarities in the crimes themselves, these objections feel weak. They feel like justifications, not discoveries. The FBI isn't a single mind. It's a collection of thousands of people. It's possible that the agents who caught McCoy were right, and the broader institution, for its own reasons, was wrong. They didn't ignore him in the sense that they never looked at him. They looked at him very hard. But they made a decision. They dismissed him. And in doing so, they may have allowed one of the most daring criminals in American history to become a legend, when in reality he was already in their grasp. We will likely never know for sure. The physical evidence is gone. The man is dead. The witnesses are old or gone themselves. All that's left is the story, and the story of Richard McCoy, the man who was a real-life hijacker, fits the story of D.B. Cooper better than any other suspect ever has. He is the ghost in the machine of the Norjack investigation, the answer that was right there, all along. And the question of whether the FBI got it wrong will hang in the air forever, just like a man who jumped from a plane into a dark and stormy night.